This week I want to give a disease update for corn diseases after we had the announcement a few weeks ago about southern rust being widespread in some areas of Nebraska. Of course, southern rust is still here, and in many cases it's continued to move locally. We have very patchy disease in some areas, some locally heavier disease, but nothing reportedly severe at this point. Some people that have sprayed fungicides are reporting concern, though, that they saw disease immediately after application, and there's a few things that might help explain that. And some of them may have to do with lack of canopy penetration down to the deepest, furthest leaves in the lower canopy that may not have been protected. Otherwise, it's also important to remember the incubation period or latent period of the fungi that cause these diseases. It's important for us to remember that these fungi may have infected a few days before the application. Considering the incubation period or latent period may be several days, and that the curative activity of some of these fungicides is not capable of killing infections that have been there for more than about a day or so. And so if infection occurred before that, you may still see lesion development or even sporulation of rust fungi after a fungicide application. And so there are a few explanations for that. Most people should not need a second fungicide application, but if you're still watching disease severity and monitoring in case you are considering a fungicide application, especially on maybe more vulnerable fields that were later planted. And so what I would consider is watch for that disease severity. Look at the weather forecast, the recent weather and what's coming. Temperatures in the 70s would be very favorable for tar spot, which has not been a big problem for us this year. Southern rust may have slowed down during the recent cool period, but as things warm back up, we might see a little more activity for southern rust then. But we may also be getting out of the critical period for early grain fill stages where we are in many fields here in Nebraska. So consider crop stage, and that applications made into the later dough stages and especially beyond that are much less likely to provide a return on the investment. The other disease, tar spot, we've been talking about has not been as active as what we expected either. It may become more so after the recent cool down period that we've experienced because those conditions are more favorable for that fungus, and especially in the next few weeks as we approach harvest and we often have higher humidity and lower temperatures, then often that's when we see a spike in tar spot. And so that would be a good time to scout for that disease to know where you may see pressure the following year. It's also important for us to mention that we're still seeing a lot of bacterial leaf streak from eastern to western Nebraska. Some fields have heavy disease pressure, and it looks very alarming on some of those susceptible hybrids, but keep in mind this is bacterial. Fungicides won't stop this pathogen, and it's important to differentiate it from gray leaf spot that you might be seeing as well out there.
Well, we're kind of coming down to the busy part of the season for disease. Things are going to start to show up, but we're also getting to the point where management decisions might not be economical. So really, if you're thinking about doing anything, make sure you know what stage your beans are at. Make sure you consider how much time you have left and how full those pods are getting. So if you've got a healthy looking crop and it gets a little later in the month, it might not be worth doing anything. But right now what's showing up is white mold. We're starting to see white mold in southern parts of the state, especially in irrigated fields. Anywhere from like Seward down to SCAL where we're at today, we've heard reports. We're also seeing it up north in the rain-fed parts near Concord, Wayne, places like that. So when white mold shows up this late, you really want to make those applications of fungicide earlier, around R2. We're getting into later stages where there might be a little bit of time left to go out and make something, but once those plants are infected, you're not going to save them, and it's really not going to be spreading plant to plant. It's just coming from the mushroom-like structures on the ground still. So think about that. We're also seeing Phytophthora show up late in some of the fields as well. Watch those and make good notes on those areas so you can get a good resistant variety for Phytophthora in those fields next year.